Senators, when the Senate rose, the question under discussion was the Appropriation 2020-2021 bill. Honorable Minister for Home Affairs, Justice and National Security.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the opportunity to speak this afternoon. Good afternoon, fellow senators. Madam President, I rise to support the Appropriation Bill of 2020-2021. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Alan Michael Chasney, on his brilliant delivery and wonderful response to the comments of the opposition. Kudos to the people who assisted in the preparation of the Appropriation Bill 2020-2021. Madam President, I would like to thank the Almighty for allowing me to have the opportunity of growing up in this era. I had the great pleasure of being able to mingle with some of the great St. Lucians who have graced the land of our country, the landscape of our country. And I can name a few persons, and I'd just like to name a few. The list is not exhaustive, but I just want to mention just a few persons. I'd like to mention, recognize Sir John Compton, who is regarded as father of the nation, George Charles, Honorable Vincent Flosac, who was our first Chief Justice in the Caribbean, Sir Michael Chasney, businessman extraordinary, Derek Walcott, our Nobel laureate, Honorable Alan Lewis, our other Nobel laureate, Apple Lewis, sorry, our other Nobel laureate, Honorable Dunstan Sentoma, who was into culture and arts. We also had Honorable Susie Dovey, who was our first female judge. I also like to recognize Mindu Phillip, who was a sportsman by excellence. I remember when I scored 90, I was 96 not out against Grenada, and I got out, and he gave me a little callot behind the head for getting out and not scoring my century. So I remember that. Mr. Neville Skeet, one of our premier architects of this land, George Odlum, literary expert, Rick Wayne, Kenneth Foster QC, who I must say, and this morning I heard that you pronounced your condolences to the family. I want to join you, Madam President, in that. I knew Mr. Foster personally when I was a young prosecutor. He was a trailblazer in his field of criminal law. And I remember an incident where he was representing about 5 or 6 defendants in the Gabo case. And I was the lone prosecutor and he made a submission using a book called Blackstone. And at that time, I didn't even know what Blackstone was. But having read from the book and knowing his technique, that sometimes Ken would read certain aspects of the literature that suited him, but would not give the whole thing, I asked him to look at the book. And he gave it to me, and I read, and I found a little passage a little lower from what he had read, and I found what I wanted, and I used it. And he immediately asked me for the book and asked me to go and buy one. So I remember him very fondly. And also he was a formidable sportsman, pugilist and footballer. There are many other persons, Madam President, that I can talk about, but I need to get on with the business at hand. So in that regard, Madam Speaker, I feel sad for our young people, because the persons who should be the positive role models at this time are not living up to expectation. What we are now engaging in is a conversation or a rhetoric of hate, race, and lawlessness. Martin Luther Jr. said, "Judge a man not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character." So I thank God for the white presentation brothers and the sisters who manage St. Mary's College and St. Joseph's Convent, respectively. In this Senate, Madam President, I want to congratulate some of the senators who have been endorsed by the parties, but I recognize also that we seem to have three political parties in the Senate at this time. So persons who are interested in the politics need to show face and stand up to be recognized. The Appropriation Bill is an extensive document, Madam President, and as such, I will not be able to discuss all the topics that were dealt with. So I would like to deal with the topics of security, justice, border control, and sports. During the last general elections campaign of 2016, Madam President, we had the vexing issue of IMPACS. And today, the politicians have spoken extensively about IMPACS. I have done that. The opposition has done it in their own form and fashion. But today, Madam President, I would like to give the public a true picture of where this matter started, where we are at present, and what is about to unfold. To assist me in doing this, Madam President, I would like to use the book offered by the former Commissioner Vernon Paswa in his book, Restored Confidence, My Journey in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. And if persons want me to make it a copy of, a document of the thing, I would. You have a copy? Good. So good reading. Yeah. So I would read certain portions of I can give it to you. I will read certain portions of the book so that we can understand from an individual who has no political color but was actually involved at the helm of the police force when this episode occurred. So on page 5, Madam President, he writes, and I read, "Another motivation for writing Restored Confidence was to challenge the irresponsible and altogether bogus address which was delivered by the then Prime Minister Kenny Anthony on March 8, 2015. My response to various aspects of the address is intended to lay out the truth of the events of 2011. I have also utilized the occasion to advance the political reasons behind the United States government imposition of the lay sanction on St. Lucia and the fact that the police department was sacrificed in the process." On page 119, Madam President, he explains the genesis of the police force task force. And again I read, "A task force was established to ensure a dedicated police presence in the high crime areas and to assist the other operational units in the apprehension of criminal suspects. When the task force became fully operationalized, Then Deputy Commissioner of Police with responsibility for operations, Mr. Pancras Albert, was the officer with overall command. The task force operated in groups whose main task was to provide a patrol presence in the so-called red zone of Chaussee Road and its environs. This arrangement invariably placed the patrol officers in a position to directly confront the gangs, or their remit was to be in an area where the gangs operated. Although criminal activity was not completely abated, the presence of the officers in the communities provided a degree of pause for the raging criminal elements.
Minister, I am not sure that 37.2 applies, but
Sure.
I would like you to read it, and if it does,
Which one is that?
37.2. And if it does, please be careful that you don't prejudice the interests of the parties. If it does not apply, proceed.
37 true. Referential. I think, Madam President, I understand where you are guiding me, but this book is a book in a public domain. Other persons have read this book, and I do not think that anything that he's saying there is going to prejudice any. I'm not mentioning any names, I'm not mentioning any individuals per se. I am just actually keeping to what the book has said. So, whose name? Yeah, but he said that he was the Prime Minister. That's all. Dr. Kenny Anthony is not in court. There's no, I don't know of any case that he has in the criminal court. So, there isn't anybody presently before a criminal court.
I accept that, except that I will tell you, please do not prejudice the interests of any parties within. You will have to tread very lightly.
I'm treading very lightly, because this is not the first time I've made the use of this book. I've actually done it at in a show, where if there is any action that has to be taken against me, it can be done. So I'm not trying to use any privilege of the House to do that. And I'm saying that this book has been out for a number of years now, and nobody has taken issue with the Commissioner's comments.
Yes, and I'm only concerned about the chamber. What happens outside doesn't concern me.
Very well, Madam President, but...
Proceed with caution, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, there are several other pages that I wanted to talk about, but I would have to try to skip based on your advice. But at least at the end of the day, the book is present in the public domain, and persons need to read the book to find out exactly what has happened. And so I just want to read one more, a page on 120. Page 120, again, Madam President, it does not prejudice anybody. And it says here, the then advisor to the government of St. Lucia on security, former Commissioner of Police Osbert Regis, was an integral part of that council. There was absolutely no difference in terms of the discussion which ensued under either the United Workers' Party or the St. Lucia Labour Party administration. Absolutely no discussion on extra or intrajudicial killings on the part of the police were ever discussed. So, Madam Speaker, Madam President, we all know the genesis of the IMPACS report. In 2010, 2011, there were those killings, 12 killings. And again, Mr. Faswa in his book says that there was a hit list. But he also comments that in that list of persons who were there on the hit list, only 2 persons were executed. And so he doesn't understand the correlation between a hit list and the list that he did for the edification of his own men. In 2014, Madam President, the Americans imposed the Leahy Law on St. Lucia. And as such, the St. Lucia Labour Party was forced to have an investigation conducted into those killings. The Honorable Prime Minister at the time, Kenny Anthony, turned to the regional entity called IMPACS. And IMPACS means the Implementation Agency for Crime and Security in the Caribbean. The director of IMPACS at the time was Mr. Francis Forbes, a former commissioner of the Jamaican Constabulary. And as such, he invited fellow officers from Jamaica to be the investigators. Those officers came to St. Lucia and conducted investigations. The law was changed. The Coroner's Act was changed to allow those persons to collect information and evidence. The law also mandated at the time that at the end of the investigations, a copy of the report was to be handed over to the Director of Public Prosecutions. From our information, we realized that the Honorable Prime Minister Kenny Anthony was given a copy of the IMPACS report as courtesy. What followed was that the Honorable Prime Minister at the time, Kenny Anthony, failed to take the advice of his cabinet of ministers and had a presentation on television. And on that fateful day, he made certain pronouncements about IMPACS report. It was left for the United Workers' Party to find an end to that saga. We had promised the people of St. Lucia that we would have looked into the matter and bring it to a finality. But having been in government, we realized how difficult that task would be. The Prime Minister and myself contacted our counterparts in Jamaica, the Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister of Home Affairs, and requested the statements that were recorded by the investigators to be sent to St. Lucia. The gentleman who was in charge of the investigation said, in no uncertain terms, it didn't matter how, whatever done to him, he would not in no way give the statements. Because had he handed over the statements to St. Lucia, then we will not be able to control the aftermath. As a result, the DPP was forced, Madam President, to start the investigations all over. And this is the result, this was the delay in dealing with the IMPACS report. But I give the assurance to this House that before the next general election, that the IMPACS report will be dealt with once and for all. Madam President, the achievements of the police force. The police force have been given a number of vehicles, cars, SUVs, motorcycles, a new CCTV and control room so that they can monitor the criminal activity, handheld radios, which they didn't have for years, are now part of the kit. We also looked at the restructuring of the police force. The police force had a number of ranks, and they are presently 3 assistant commissioners. We intend, and that has been done, it has been accepted, the restructuring, that there are going to be 4 assistant commissioners of police. We have done what we call insurance policy for the police. So a police officer who loses his life in the execution of his duty, his family is entitled to $400,000. A police officer who is injured in the line of duty is entitled to $200,000 of medical insurance. If he is injured and unable to work, he then receives $400,000. And we have seen that policy being enacted lately. There was a police officer who was involved in a traffic accident. He spent some time at Tapion Hospital, and when he was released, he was given $40,000. Another police officer, a special police officer from Grosley, died from natural causes, and his family was compensated by giving him $160,000. Madam President, the only regret I have when I'm dealing with the insurance policy is that we have had fatalities in the past. Remy, who was killed in Cicero, his family got nothing. Lesmo, who died on his motorcycle while in the by-elections in Mikud, got nothing. Randy Abbott from the Denry Valley was killed on his personal motorcycle. Had this insurance been in place, all three families of those police officers would have benefited from that insurance. I want to tell the police there is much more to come. In discussion with the President of the Welfare Association, he did make a plea so that his officers will be given duty-free vehicles. The Prime Minister has agreed, and police officers will get duty-free vehicles. I noticed that persons make a big deal with the duty-free vehicles and say it was not given to traveling officers. But a traveling officer is given a certain amount of money, and those monies that he is given is ready to pay for your vehicle. So if you're a traveling officer, you get $800, and the loan that you take from the bank, you're only paying $600. You're up $200 because that vehicle is only used when you're going to do your duty. And I've been a member of the public service, so I know what it happens. I know what happens. Sometimes those persons don't use the vehicle at all, and they still claim. So we are giving police officers with 5 years service and above, who are not traveling officers, who have to get to work on a daily basis from station to station. Sometimes you live in Canaries and you're stationed in Vifort. To get a bus from Canaries to go to Vifort is like pulling teeth. And this police officer will now have the ability to buy his own vehicle and be able to take his family out for a ride. We are now looking at the police headquarters. As you know, that this is a very controversial undertaking by the government. But the government is convinced in its mind that the police force needs a good place to work from. And we are going to build a police headquarters for the police officers. Politicians interfere with the police force in many ways. But all of a sudden, persons have now been able to say, or want to say, that politicians are interfering with the police force. When I became the Minister of Home Affairs, and the new Police Welfare Association was initiated, the first person they spoke to was the leader of the opposition. They didn't come to the minister first. They went to the leader of the opposition. But I knew why they went there. At the behest of who? So that didn't bother me. When they came to me, I spoke to them, and up to a day like today, the president and the other members of the Welfare Association have a very good rapport with me. As a political party, there are going to be times that you must take decisions that will affect the police force in one way or the other. We have seen it by both parties. We have seen Regis being removed from commissioner and sent to work with the Prime Minister. We saw Faswa, who was deemed to be one of the best police commissioners in St. Lucia, removed unceremoniously and sent home. So I really don't understand why persons keep talking about politicians and the police force. I have never interfered with the management of the police force. The Commissioner, Mr. Mosheri, and the Acting Commissioner, Mr. Milton Daisy, have had a wonderful relationship with me. As a matter of fact, Mr. Mosheri will tell you that when his first promotion to corporal was at my behest, so that I wanted him to become a prosecutor, and I was in charge of the prosecution unit, and I recommended that he become a corporal. and he was sent to my department. So there really isn't any problem between the commissioner and myself. I want to touch the fire service. Madam President, when we came in, the fire service was in turmoil. There was an acting fire chief that his men and women would not speak to. There was acrimony, confusion, distrust, and everything. On assuming office, one of the first things we did was to appoint a fire chief and a deputy fire chief. Recruits joining the organization at the time, after passing out from training school, you were given a 6-month probation. Those fire officers on a monthly basis had to go through a scrutiny of appraisals. And because it took so much time, there were instances that in a certain month that they could not get their salary. I changed it and said that fire officer comes in, he gets his appraisal at the first month that he comes in, and he will get a final appraisal after 6 months. He does the exit exam. If he passes it, then he is a bona fide fire officer. There was a audit done of the fire service because the legislation does not seem to recognize modern fire service. This was done by some English officers together with St. Lucians, and we have accepted parts of that report. The Welfare Association is now working with the Ministry of Public Service to bring that to fruition. We have opened the Babano Fire Station. We have employed 80 new fire officers to man that police station and to replace officers who have retired. A number of ambulances have been purchased. A fire tender for Uranora International Airport costing $1.5 million was purchased. And I must say, Madam President, that the St. Lucia Labour Party did in fact put $1.5 million towards that fire tender for the Uranora International Airport. We presently have 2 ladder trucks, one from Japan and one just donated by the Canadians, so that the fire that we experienced in the boulevard, had we had a ladder truck, we would have been able to extinguish this fire much quicker than was done. So we have now 2 ladder trucks, one for the south of the island and one for the north of the island. I am sure that persons would have recognized and seen fire officers on that scene without any mask. Some have handkerchiefs over their faces. And again, we recognize that was dangerous. And so breathing apparatus have been donated to the fire station, fire officers. We spruced up the Soufre fire station where the officers were clamoring that they did not want to stay. And we again spent some money there. And it was done in such a manner that they are satisfied and no longer want to get away from there. So they are actually there and very happy. Madam President, I go on to the prisons. I remembered about 1.5 years ago, we had the hurricanes Irma and the other one, Maria, that devastated some of our Caribbean islands and the British Virgin Islands. The Prime Minister at the time offered to house some prisoners at Bordelais. The opposition and other members of public made a big hue and cry about we jeopardizing the security of the St. Lucia public. We gave the public our assurance that we had the ability, we had the manpower, we had the personnel up there with all the necessary tools and equipment to handle those prisoners safely. And at the end of the day, we were proven right. So much so that the government of the BVI recognized in Mr. Gad his brilliance and were able to now take him away from us because obviously he has better salary and condition. And so he is doing a wonderful job in the BVI. So congratulations to Mr. Gell. We have now designated a block at the facility to make it an extension of the mental wellness center. As you would know, Madam President, there were 2 prisoners at Bodley who had mental issues and had been at Bodley for a number of years, and no case was held against them. The government has to now find $4 million to pay the family, these 2 individuals, much to the chagrin of the families of the lady who died in Ancillary. So these are some of the things that we have done. We have had to find a new manager for Bodley, and interviews were done, and Mr. Herman, who had been a previous director, was the one chosen to continue the good work at the Bodley. Well, that's what I'm saying. He had the job before, but he went through the process and was deemed to be the best individual. Again, the ministry has nothing to do with this. It is the Public Service Commission that deals with those promotions. I now move on to justice, Madam President. We employed a DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions. And a lot of persons have talked about...
Minister, you have 15 more minutes.
How many more minutes?
15.
15? I will...
Quarter past.
Okay, I'll just try it. Well, I'll have to wrap up. And I want to say that persons have talked about our DPP. But I want to say that we never made him DPP. It is the Legal and Judicial Services that makes the appointment. But we had to make the department or the position attractive enough for him to have accepted. And I'm happy that he accepted the position. And I'm very happy with this present DPP, despite all the negative talk that we have heard. This DPP has had to deal with the Lombards affair, which cost this government over $3 million. The police officers who were assigned to investigate the Lombard affair, unfortunately, were transferred because of their investigation of this matter. We have had a fireman who was accused of murder, and this was very problematic. The DPP has been able to settle this matter. We had a Pratt murder, which occurred in Beaufort almost 6 years ago, and the DPP was able, with the help of the persons from the forensic lab, to be able to get a successful conclusion to this matter. And soon, as I promised, we will be dealing with the IMPACS report. The Hall of Justice, again, this is a very controversial discussion, but I want to give a little synopsis as to how we got to this Hall of Justice being in the same position or in the same location with the police headquarters. On becoming the minister with responsibility for justice, the financial center was still not opened or utilized. I had a discussion with the Honorable Prime Minister Alan Chasney, and he agreed immediately that we could use the financial center as a Hall of Justice. I remember visiting the financial center along with the president of the Bar Association, the registrar of the High Court, other magistrates, Mr. John Peters at the time, to see how we could reconfigure the financial center to make it a Hall of Justice. Everything was apropos, and we were moving along smoothly until the Chief Justice called and indicated that she was not in favor of the financial center. No reasons were given, and when I did speak to the Chief Justice, she said that she had been told that we wanted to put the Court of Appeal in the same building. And I told her, but I know for a fact that the Court of Appeal cannot be together with the High Court. But that happened, and it went by the way. So the Ministry of Finance quickly moved in and occupied the building. We have been trying unsuccessfully to deal with a Hall of Justice, and at the time we decided to build the police headquarters, we recognized that that was an opportunity to use, to kill two birds with one stone. I had discussions with the former president of the Bar Association at the time, and there was no objection. In a small country like ours, it is difficult to make edifices like a police headquarters and then to get the money to go and build a separate courthouse. We are making sure, and we will have further discussions with the present president of the Bar Association, Madam President, to show that there in no way will there be any interference with the police and the bar. The police headquarters will have its own entrance. The courthouse will have its own entrance. There will be no ability for you to go from one building to the other and the internal part of those buildings. Okay? And then I am surprised that at the discussion of some of the lawyers are actually saying that by having a courthouse together with a police headquarters, that judges and magistrates can be influenced. And I take serious umbrage to those statements. And I figure that this is why we have still not been able to go to the CCJ, because we still do not have trust in our people. Okay? Still do not have trust in our people. And for lawyers to say that they think that a police officer will be able to influence a judge in such a manner that justice will not be served is not really a fair statement. And I think our judges deserve much better than that. I don't think any of our judges can be influenced by anybody. But this is the situation at the end of the day, Madam President, that we are a small country with limited finances, and we have to make the best of what we have. This location gives us an ideal opportunity to be able to, for once and for all, give the judges, magistrates, and persons seeking justice a place where they can do that with as much freedom as possible. You don't have to get a bus to go there. You can walk. You don't have to go and buy expensive food in a restaurant that would be in that building if it was away from town. And so I think we have a good location, and discussion will continue. We have looked at the border control. We are looking forward to immediately getting into border control. And the border control, for persons who don't know, will incorporate the Immigration Department, the Customs Department, the Quarantine Department of the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Marine Unit. At a later date, because of the time constraints, I will talk a little more about this. The ministry has always also appointed an expungement board where persons who have a criminal record and have served the period of time what we call, the name doesn't come right now, but after you have served a number of years after you have left prison, then your conviction is spent. But even if it is spent and you go and get a police record, the police would still put that record on it. And that was giving a lot of young people difficulties, because although they had spent the time of rehabilitation that the law required, the mere fact that the offense was there, so let's say for a joint, marijuana, it was there, that you would not be able to get a clean record. So the expungement board is there, that you can go to the board, and the board takes it away from you completely, and there is going to be no reference of that conviction on your record. We have also made the appointment of a parole board. It was there, on the books for years and for years and for years. And you had prime ministers who were lawyers and never, for once, initiated the parole board. But the parole board is there. Okay? The only reason why we have not had a couple cases, which we had estimated that would have been in February of this year, is because the gentleman who is the expert in that, and is allowing us to go through the process, the training and so on, is stuck in Canada and can't come. So as soon as he can travel to St. Lucia, he's going to be doing that, and so that we can have a parole board. With the parole board, anybody who's been in prison for over 14 years, you have a right for your sentence to be reviewed. And so we would not find ourselves in the situation where we have to pay persons money for not hearing their cases. There's a backlog of cases. The Prime Minister has mentioned a sum of $320-something thousand so that we deal with backlog, so that we can employ a couple more judges dedicated to dealing with the backlog that we have presently. We had a new courthouses. We have spent money ad infinitum when it comes to courthouses. We inherited a Naira court. And imagine, Madam President, that you have a court. The first 2 floors are occupied by the court, and the last floor, the top floor, is occupied by the owner and businessman of that courthouse. Where was the security? And obviously something would have happened. Eventually something happened, and this government had to step in and spend almost $750,000 to acquire the top of that building and to renovate the court. That is working perfectly now. I just want to touch on sports because I think I was an avid sportsman, and without knowing any boast, I mean a sportsman per extraordinaire. So now before anybody goes and finds my record and says that I say I represent St. Lucia at football, and that is not so, I am telling you that I was a national footballer, a national cricketer, national athlete, national table tennis player, national volleyballer. So you know that. That's true. So please tell other persons, don't go and make any statements that I'm not. So we have talked about Lockerbie, giving Lockerbie $42 million. And everybody knows why that $32 million is there. It's to purchase equipment, to pay the contractors, to pay the salary and wages of persons who are working. Obviously, yes, Mr. Lockerbie will be paid because he's overseeing the project. The Prime Minister has talked about we giving St. Lucian athletes the best facilities possible. And so when I hear people talk about the synthetic surface, I really wish, Madam President, that I was young again so that I could go on that field with a synthetic surface and play proper football. The leader of opposition government business, opposition of leader, understand where I'm coming from. We play football at the back of the college. And sometimes on a rainy day, we have to stop because your boots take so much mud that your feet, you swear that you're carrying about 20 pounds on each foot. Okay? And that was not good for our ankles, it was not good for our health. So, we have had the president of the Football Association, the president of FIFA has visited St. Lucia and given his blessings. You know? And I'm telling you, Madam President, as an ex-footballer, ex-national player, I really wish that I had the opportunity to play on synthetic surface. Because by playing on the synthetic surface, the ball comes to you much quicker, you learn more ball control, you have more skills. The idea of we playing in 6 pegs that are as long as this, and before you touch a guy, you almost break his leg. With the synthetic surface, you don't play with that. You play with studs, plastic studs, and rubber studs. So again, the safety of our players are going to be much enhanced. So, Madam Speaker, Madam President, before I end, I want to say that lately I have seen a change in our people, and it's a very strange and dangerous change. Persons in our community are openly breaking the law, having public gatherings, motorcades in a time of a state of emergency. Persons are clearly flouting the law and giving the police and testing the results of the police. I must say that the police officers so far have operated very, very well and above board. and I congratulate them for that. But there will, if it continues, Madam President, there will come a time when the police will have to stand firm. And I really do not want us to degenerate into a situation like this. I understand politics. I understand that election is due next year, June. And if the Prime Minister wishes, can go to September. What is the rush? What is the rush? You cannot go and have public meetings. The United Workers' Party cannot have public meetings. And so it is really unfortunate. It is really unfortunate that persons who should know better are flouting the law just because of politics. And it really reeks of desperation. You have all sorts of professionals in this island now, closet politicians and all sorts of people giving all kind of advice. And at the end of the day, we are going to pay for it. I may not be around, but my children, if we continue this reckless and lawless behavior, we are going to pay for it. We have seen what's happening in the United States of America. We've seen what's happening in our backyard in Trinidad and Tobago. Is that what we want for St. Lucia? For the sake of politics? Wait your time. Take your time. The time will come. The people will have a choice. They will decide at the end of the 5 years that we have voted in for whether they are satisfied with the work that we have done and whether they want us to continue. But I suspect that the presentation and the way our members on this side was able to sell to the public on the projects and achievements of this government over the last 4 years, they are now running scared. So you pay. So Madam Speaker, Madam President, I want to thank you. And again, I want to just end on a note of caution to St. Lucians. Be very careful what we ask for. Some of us will not be able to stay in that fire. And I know there are persons who have ways and means of running away. And as they normally do, when things are hot, they run. 1979 is an ideal situation. 82, they run. And when things were quiet, they came back to St. Lucia. Do not find yourself in that situation. I am not going to run away from St. Lucia for nothing whatsoever. And I intend to see my children and my grandchildren live in a peaceful and prosperous St. Lucia. I thank you.
Senator Ferdinand.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon, colleagues. Madam President, I have listened to a couple of presentations today, and at some point I had to remind myself that I was not that is not the month of May, which we traditionally consider reading month, where we listen to and we also engage in stories and reading to children. I just remind myself that we are in the Senate and we are going to be discussing, or we are deliberating on the Appropriations Bill 2020-2021. Now, Madam President, a debate on the Appropriations Bill is supposed to be a debate that focuses on policies of the government and also tells us how the government intends to implement those policies, how they allocate resources, and we come to the House to decide whether we agree with some of the policies. If we have seen gaps, the opposition can highlight its concerns, the government can justify these policies, and we can have a discussion. However, what I have seen, Madam President, thus far, is that we have engaged in something that appears to be a campaign, a new form of election campaign in the Parliament. And I don't think that this is what this Honorable House is about, or should be used for. So, Madam President, I will attempt to speak to the bill, and I will also, as I mentioned, seek to identify specific aspects of the policy pronouncements made by the government, some of which were made through the Prime Minister, some through other members of the government side, and including the Prime Minister's budget address, copy of which we all have, and to express my own views, my sentiments, and perhaps a few suggestions about what has happened. Madam President, it is very clear that most of what we've heard from the government appears to be a list or a number of initiatives that are based on constituency or constituency-based projects. My colleague, leader of government opposition business, described it as concrete and steel and, drains and roads. But it is clear that the focus of the 2020-2021 Appropriations Bill has really been about government initiating projects, if not to save some seats, but to appease the populace or the population. Madam President, this budget does not appear to be suited to respond to a post-COVID situation. We all have agreed in this Honorable House and elsewhere that our country has faced a serious challenge because of the advent of COVID-19. And we would expect that any budget that is presented in this time will have some form of response to the current environment and would focus on a post-COVID type of response. So, Madam President, I would expect that at this time that this is what the budget would have done. But we must remember that it has become very difficult for the government to respond because of the decisions they made pre-COVID. And of course, the government was in office approximately 4 years, just about 4 years, before that predicament came about. And so, Madam President, some of the things that caused that would be the excessive borrowing that the government engaged in, that they were cautioned about. The opposition, members of civil society, friends of the country, people who were responsible and were concerned about the future of our country, cautioned the government about the excessive borrowing that took place and the overambitious projects that the government undertook that landed us in lots of debt. So, Madam President, 4 years on, the government, in its quest to achieve some of its ambitions that were not in sync with the vision of the rest of the country, had borrowed so much that they even had to go to the NIC. And as we know, Madam President, the government becoming cash-strapped, going to the NIC, which is not in its formation, the NIC was not designed to become a borrowing entity or a financial cash cow for any government. The NIC was designed as a social safety or social safety net for retired citizens, a government facility that can help to put monies aside to pay for our pension and provide our citizens with some measure of comfort and assurance. But, Madam President, because of the practice of the government in engaging in those wasteful, irresponsible decisions of borrowing and spending, we have now found ourselves in the predicament that we are today. It is no wonder that what you are seeing now is a desperate attempt by the government, through both the lower house and the Senate so far, to try to throw out quite a few nice-sounding ideas and projects that are intended to appease the electorate. Madam President, I think that the cancellation, for example, of the PPP that we have spoken about in this House before, in favor of over $500 million, which we can almost say is about a third of the GDP, to construct the airport, is one of those examples that I spoke about. Madam President, we also realized that during the few months that we were on lockdown and that schools were out, that the government realized that it would have been better if they had invested previously in the laptop program that became a serious issue when our students were home and needed to engage in e-learning. So all of these challenges that we faced during the COVID period were brought about because of the way the government operated pre-COVID. So there was a pre-existing condition that was created, Madam President, by the behavior of the government. And so in 2020, 2021, which basically is the government's final fiscal year, you have a desperate attempt to get everything done that was not done in the 4 years to happen in 1 year. We just heard from the Minister for Justice that the IMPACS situation will be handled by the end of or before the elections. We are talking about something less than a year to go, Madam President. So is the government trying to convince St. Lucians that it can achieve 5 years' work in 1 year? I don't think we are, and I think St. Lucians have learned. So, Madam President, all this budget has done is to expose the government's wrongdoings and to allow us to see the government for what it truly is. So, Madam President, let me just go to a few areas that I believe the budget spoke to, either by the pronouncements by various heads, ministries, as well as the Prime Minister's pronouncements, and seek to examine how those pronouncements are either impractical, unrealistic, and are not achievable. I'll begin, Madam President, with sustainable development. We were told by the minister responsible that the government of the United Workers' Party is known for doing. Madam President, I want to ask, for doing what? Is it for doing nothing about the Dennery wind farm project that the government in 4 years has failed to capitalize on, that could have provided us with alternative methods of using renewable energy? Madam President, what is the government's pronouncement? What can the government say that they have done if the whole point is that it's a government of doing? Doing nothing about having a clear education plan for the country, and doing nothing about doubling the transportation subsidy that I have heard several times being referred to in this Honorable House, even this morning. Madam President, I want to re-emphasize, and I've said it before, that this is not the case. What has happened is that the government has replaced and not doubled, drivers who were perceived to be supporting the Labour Party, with drivers who were perceived not to be. But the overall number of students on that program or drivers providing that service has not doubled. And I think the government needs to stop saying that to the people of St. Lucia. And it's not the first or the second time it has happened. So the government has done nothing about that. Madam President, doing nothing. Again, it's supposed to be a government of doing, but I say doing nothing. Doing nothing about the ability to sustain the laptop program that I mentioned. And let me say a little bit more about that, Madam President. That program, when it was designed, it was envisaged, or it was perceived. The point of that program was to empower every single St. Lucian child, regardless what school you attended, what part of the country you're from, what profession your parents held. Every St. Lucian child would have been empowered with a learning tool to facilitate e-learning or to facilitate technology being used to enhance their learning. Every single child. So, Madam President, the reality that we faced during COVID-19 was that this exposed the government to the extent that officials of the Ministry of Education were calling on private citizens to assist. So, Madam President, it is very clear that the government has not done anything to change or improve that situation. Instead, what we see, and I want to refer to page 19 of the Prime Minister's budget speech, Madam President. On page 19, the Prime Minister in his speech indicated that his government views education as a basic human right. It is there on page 19. The government, or his government, views education as a basic human right. Madam President, yet it is this same government that has done nothing to sustain a program that was ensuring that every St. Lucian child had the right to own an electronic device for learning. What have they done? The direct opposite of what the Prime Minister is saying. And that is, selected schools are being given e-books. Selected schools. Not every school, not every child. And so how could you tell me that you want to speak of the rights to every child, everybody's basic human rights? This speaks to the matter of equity, Madam President, equity of access to resources, and only some are able to access a device or something that has less capability than something they were already getting. And I've said it in the House before, Madam President, that e-books can be accessed through a laptop. So if the government can tell our children that they're going to give some of them e-books, when all of them will get in laptops, I really think that it's either the government doesn't think that our students and teachers and St. Lucians have a good brain, or that they are so busy speaking to themselves that they don't realize or understand. Madam President.
Senator, you're quoting from?
I only quoted from page 19 of the Prime Minister.
We're on page 19, for the record.
Under education.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Under education, line 2, if I may read, in the area of education, Mr. Speaker, the government of St. Lucia views education as a basic human right.
Thank you.
Right? So I was using that phrase to emphasize that a basic human right ensures that there is equity in the distribution of resources. And that when you speak of a basic human right, that right has to be afforded to every single person in the situation, not to some. And that is why every single St. Lucian child has to be taken into consideration, and not selected schools. On what basis do you determine the selected schools? We saw it happen in the second year of office, when these same laptops that were taken away from our students were being given to specific schools. That is unequitable, Madam President, and it's not right. It's not right. Give everyone, even if you can give each of them a little bit. And if you have to give some, you need to justify why these should get and these should not. Madam President, I am still on that issue of the laptop, because we cannot leave it alone just because we've mentioned it before. Repetition has its place in some cases. And I'm not repeating the phrase, but I'm speaking to the concept in terms of education. Madam President, we remember the infamous phrase of Ki Ganyi Ki Asa. We know who said that? Ki Ganyi Ki Asa, speaking to the use of laptops. What benefit is in laptops, right? And now there is a desperate bid by these same people to save face by giving our students e-books and coming to this house and boasting about how many e-books that they're giving children. Hypocrisy, Madam President. Hypocrisy. We need to stop. So there is no equity. And also there is a last-minute gimmick for a suitable replacement of laptops by e-books. Now, Madam President, I think if we are serious about that statement that was made by the Prime Minister, it needs to be demonstrated in our actions. I think by now, a government after 4 years, making pronouncements like that, should have been able to get, now that we use Zoom as a form of convening and interacting, making Zoom access available to all schools, free subscription, and that is not expensive, to all schools on the island, to allow teachers, principals, parents, and students to interact. That could be a very easy initiative that doesn't cost us all the money that we've been spending on all those things in the last few months. So, Madam President, that's a very simple suggestion, and I would present it in good faith and hope that the government can see the benefit in doing so. Madam President, I want to move to an area that I'm very concerned about, because I was directly involved in the situation prior to becoming a politician. Madam President, after 4 years of a government saying that it's a government of doing, this government has done nothing, and I repeat, nothing, Madam President, to improve the condition of schooling and the school structure and facility at the Miku Secondary School, a school where I was principal for 10 years. Madam President, this is a school in the constituency of the Minister for Education in this country. And I remembered promises were made to build a new block. Madam President, 4 years later, not even that one single block on the Form 3 western wing of the Miku Secondary School has been built. But now you hear a promise of a new school, a brand new school being built. Yes, you couldn't build one block, you couldn't build one room in 4 years, but you'll build a new school now in 1 year. Haven't we heard that somewhere, Madam President, before? Haven't we heard that? You couldn't build one hotel room in 4 years, but you can build 8 hotels in 1 year. Haven't we heard that before? The same argument, Madam President. It is really shameful that we are hearing these kinds of things happening. And people expect us to believe that. But Madam President, I have some news for you. The people of Miku North, they have wisened up. They have wisened up. And this thing about building a model school in 1 year, after not having given them a room for their children in 4 years, is not going to be swallowed easily. Madam President, in spite of that being said, if you look at it a little further, there is actually no allocation in the estimates for that school. So, I mean, if there was an intention to even start the school, you would have expected in the estimates of expenditure to see an allocation. And I can point you to the estimates, Madam President, and tell you that if you look under the section that deals with allocations for schools, under secondary schools, there is only one secondary school where any allocation is made for. And Madam President, the only school is the George Charles Secondary School. We can refer to page 600 of the estimates, and you will find that there is an allocation for rehabilitation work on the George Charles Secondary School, page 600. That is the only school an estimate, an allocation was actually made for. But the government is coming to tell us now that they are going to build a brand new school in Miku in 1 year. And they couldn't build one room in 4 years. I leave that for the people of Miku North to deal with. Madam President, on Monday, we had another cohort of students who wrote the common entrance exam. And 2 of these students happen to be my children. So I'm very concerned about the next 5 years of their secondary education. Madam President, I remember coming to this honorable house one September and making a strong plea. I even made a press statement to ask the government to pay attention to the preparatory works that had to be done at the Binfield Comprehensive Secondary School in Beaufort. And at that point, a promise was made that there was going to be a block, a new block built for the Form 1s. To date, Madam President, with all the $10 million I heard about this morning that was spent on education, $10 million, the children of Beaufort, Grace, Deriso, Miku, and Larry Schultz, and so on, are still housed at the Beaufort Primary School, the Form 1s. No block, no place for them. They are still sharing another compound with a primary school, our Form 1s. So when they move to Form 2 in September, the new Form 1s coming in, I need to know where the government has made provisions for us to put them. We're not going to put them in the stables, Madam President. They are not horses. They are dignified young people, and my children aren't going to no stables. I'm from the South. They are going to be placed in a school as dignified children. They have to be placed in a decent place, and I expect that the government will come good, because we do not have much time between now and September. And a cohort of students for any of the schools in the South would be anywhere between 60 and 120 students. So this is a serious matter. We need to stop playing games with our children. If you want to play your games on platform and you know, with your political rivals, that's fine. Don't play games with our nation's children. So, Madam President, the $10 million that has been boasted about, to this date, we have children sharing the compound of another school. And the same is occurring at the Miku Secondary School. We still have children going to class in the primary school. But you talk about $10 million. I'd like to know what has been done with that $10 million. What percentage of it has been spent on consultancies? Consultancies, retooling, retraining, telling teachers what they already know. You know? And then you say you're spending money. You have to get value for the taxpayers' money. If you're going to spend $10 million in education, there must be some kind of value. It must show that you're getting value for it. Madam President, this thing about we will do in quick time and we can get it done and give us time and wait your turn, this kind of rhetoric needs to stop. And we need to see serious action. Now, Madam President, I move to the final area in education. And I want to speak to the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. The Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, as we know it, is considered the island's most senior or premier tertiary and post-secondary institution. And we all know that it was named after our first Nobel laureate. So there is a lot of pride associated with this institution. Madam President, sadly, it is the worst that I've ever known it to be since I was a student there in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The worst. And I'll give you two examples why I say that, Madam President. From talking about transforming an institution to a full-time university college, we are now at a stage where staff of Sir Arthur Lewis, staff of the college, not even the students, the people who work there, are not even certain about their salaries. In April, almost 2 weeks into the new month, and nobody had gotten paid. And there are at least 30 persons, 30 teachers on the staff who got letters of notice in May. Now one will say that they're on contract. Yes, we understand, and sometimes contracts are not renewed. Yes, we understand. But it's an unprecedented number. And you know why, Madam President? Because some of the courses that were being offered have been terminated. They no longer offer. So if you were teaching building technology or you were doing information technology and they have terminated the course, there's no more work for you. But there's no justification. Nothing was given, no explanation as to why some of these were terminated. And you are talking about people with master's degrees who have worked hard, they have mortgages, out of a job. Somebody said it's building the new St. Lucia. That's not the St. Lucia that we want to live in, Madam President. That's not the St. Lucia we bargained for in the elections of 2016. Madam President, I want now to move to sports, an area that I must agree with my colleague Senator that we both have a great passion for. And I must say that he was very truthful about his his abilities and his achievements in sports, and I commend him. But I would be very worried, Madam President, if I were him, if he was a young man growing up now and playing sports in St. Lucia. Very worried. I'll tell you why, Madam President. The leader of government business, when I arrived this morning, the first thing I was able to pick up stated that we have a master plan for sports. Now, I don't know who she was talking about. I don't know if it's myself and those of us over on this side. But she said we have a master plan for sports. So I asked, what is the master plan that we have? And in her case, I would assume that she's referring to the government of the United Workers' Party. What is the master plan that the government has for sports? Is it an AstroTurf master plan? Because, Madam President, if you have to be truthful in this country, the only thing that a sports person can see and can hear of, and it was just re-emphasized by the last senator who spoke, is a semblance of AstroTurf all over the place. And I was a little disappointed hearing a sportsman who played cricket, basketball, football, track and field, high jump. The man was telling us in this honorable house, Madam President, that he wished he was playing sports because he would not have to wear six pegs. Madam President, AstroTurf is made for what sport? And FIFA president came here. Of course, I was a football administrator. Yes, footballers can play on AstroTurf under certain conditions. Madam President, it looks like St. Lucia has become a country where we only play one sport. The member played cricket, so where are the cricketers going to play? He was a high jumper. Madam President, this is absurd. In Deriso, you have a playing field that serves all different sporting disciplines are played on the playing field. And in most of our communities around the country, we do not have 7 or 8 sporting facilities available. We may have one playing field for an entire community of over 5,000 or 6,000 people. And you have different sporting disciplines. And I'm sure we have other persons on this side of the house who have a history in sports administration. They will tell you that in any given year or in any given environment, you have athletes who have different competencies. You have track athletes, you have netballers, you have footballers, you have people who play all kinds of sports. And year-round, you need to be able to allow everybody to get a fair share of the facility. So they play multiple sports on the facility. When you convert all our little facilities into AstroTurf, what are you doing? Madam President, this is crazy. I attended a meeting with the Cricket Association earlier this year in Miku. And the Cricket Association wanted to get ideas to develop its vision plan. And the number one talking point by the people of my community was that they were concerned about where they were going to play their cricket.
Senator, you have 15 more minutes.
I think I'll manage, Madam President. They were concerned about where they were going to play their cricket. Madam President, we must not forget that Darren Sammy is from Miku. The Darren Sammy that we talk about is from Miku, Diga Miku. Where was Darren Sammy going to play cricket to make it to the West Indies team if all we had in Miku was AstroTurf? Really? Madam President, this fairy tale sports academy thing, I want to get to it now. Madam President, there are parents that I know, especially from the South, who have withdrawn their children who had started going to this academy in Grosley. Parents within the southern area, and they have their reasons. Madam President, I would like to propose instead, we are still in the early stages of this fantasy. Let me propose instead that we try to work with developing our athletes through the school sports program, from the primary school to the secondary school, work with the physical education teachers, give them better training and opportunities to improve themselves, bring in, if we have to, expert international level coaches, some, like the Cubans that we used to bring here, who have a very good reputation in international sport, to work with those coaches to enhance their abilities and upgrade our primary and secondary sports program through the schools. And having done that, we will be able to identify our elite athletes, those who clearly are very talented, and use the academy to refine them and prepare them for international sporting competition, or national and international level competition. Because not every child is going to become a pro, but you need to give them some way of having at least aspiring to become a successful athlete. But you cannot just take students and send them to a facility where they believe that their academics are compromised and their parents pull them out, where they have issues with being able to move between the venue and home, and the logistics that are in place for them to stay over, they are not satisfied with. If you're not ready to start something, take your time and get it right. Madam President, I also want to remind this Honorable House that once upon a time, and downstairs we were talking about it during the lunch break, Deriso was a place where every weekend there was sports action. All kinds of people from all over the place came to Deriso. And we had quite a lot of sporting entertainment and competition going on there. When last did the footballers, the netballers, the volleyballers, the basketballers, the cricketers, the track athletes in that area have one tournament? And you know why, Madam President? Because the one little facility that they had to do that was just taken away from them, and it's being prepared to become some artificial turf and astroturf. And there's nothing going on. And we know that when young minds are idle, it's a breeding ground for deviance. And it will contribute to some of the social problems we have that we learned in the lap of the Minister for Justice. He doesn't need that headache now, Madam President. He's a former athlete. He understands the relationship between recreation and healthy sporting competition and discipline. Madam President, let me move now quickly because my time is of the essence. I believe that we can borrow a little bit from the Jamaica model and see if we can use the school sports program like they did without any of this fancy stuff to develop the likes of Usain Bolt. I'm telling you, Madam President, we could never have produced a Darren Sammy from Miku on artificial turf. We could never have produced a Johnson Charles from Millet on artificial turf. We could never have produced a Kimani Melius or a Laverne Spencer or Julian Alfred from Babonneau on artificial turf because they didn't play football. They did not make their name in football. Madam President, this kind of disjointed haphazard planning and execution is not going to work. And Madam President, it was disheartening for my former house captain at school, President Minister of Sports, telling us that all he has to say to his people is, you may not have anything, but you have me. You have me. After 4 years, all they have, or the government has to tell us that we have the Minister for Sports. I shall say no more on that. Let me move to agriculture quickly, Madam President, and the reason being, I am from a rural community of Deriso where agriculture is still the mainstay and the major income provider for many families. I will not talk about the shipping bananas to France issue because that has been deliberated on quite a lot, and the non-payment of farmers for weeks. But I will venture to say, Madam President, that my schoolmates from Angers, Blanchard, Chic, Tirocher, Lacouville, Diga, and so on, will tell you that they grew up and they were paid, their parents financed the education on the farmers' money. The farmers financed the education, myself included. It was the farmers and the fishers' money, Madam President, that sent them to school, primary, tertiary, and secondary. And most, if not all of us in that community, still rely heavily on the proceeds from farming. So, Madam President, for the farmers and the fishers to survive, for example, those in Angers, they need to know what provisions the Prime Minister has made in his budget for them to sell the fish. because a lot of them still do spear diving. Madam President, they need to know that. And they're not interested in being given drinks at Toddy's bar. They need to know what is there in this budget for them as fishermen and farmers. Those of them who depend on cassava making and cashew nuts, selling cashew nuts at the Gap. They need to know what is there for them. Madam President, what provisions have been made for the Tirochet and Blanchard farmers who now have to think about license to sell charcoal? That's what I'm hearing. Or selling black pudding. Qui ça qui a budget là pour ces femmes avec ces péchés langéa qui yo ka fait yo toute qualité bois botan dit qui ça qui là pour yo en budget là? Madame President. Madam President, can I get a time check, please? I just want to know if I...
4 minutes left.
4 minutes. Madam President, on page 15 of the Prime Minister, page 13 of the Prime Minister's speech, he spoke of youth in agriculture, page 13. And he spoke of training 78 young people in youth in agriculture program. And the stress or the operative word here was training. Madam President, training. Now, every time you hear training with this government, one of the things that comes to mind is
Senator
consultants.
Thomas Francis.
Madam President, thank you. I'd like to propose that we suspend standing order 45-1 to allow the honourable member an additional 15 minutes to complete his presentation.
The question is that the standing order be invoked to allow the Senator to have 15 more minutes to complete his submission. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes